Hello friends, welcome back for another viewer requested video. This is actually one that I've done before, but I'm just going to do it a little bit more succinct and a little bit more informative and straight to the point instead of like belabored like the old one was. This is going to be all about piping as my game freezes, which really doesn't look good if I'm trying to have a cool background. Okay, there we go. But like most of our viewer requested videos, this one was inspired by a comment by Fire K Racker 92. I like just butchering people's names, by the way, so that's how I'm going to do it. But they said, love the walkthrough videos you posted recently. It's been a huge help with my playthrough. One thing I think might be good to review is piping interactions. You alluded to it multiple times through the playthrough with the cheaper element filters using shutoff valves, but the other interactions that could be useful to a newer player like me are few and far between. One thing that I recently discovered is that if you run a pipe and a branch off with a bridge, the bridge will take priority in being filled, but the line after will be ignored until the bridge is full. I would find these types of interactions in a video format very useful. Thanks! I thought I could do it all in one breath, but I guess not. Anyway, yeah, I'm going to run through a whole bunch of different information, or a whole bunch of different ways you can hook up pipes, different things about them, stuff like that. Whatever. Yeah, we're just going to get it going. Okay, first and foremost, the most basic thing about pipes is really just that there's three different types. Same thing with gas and air. All these examples are going to be interchangeable between the two of them, with very few exceptions, so I'll mention those when they come up. But the three different types you can put in here are the regular pipes, the insulated pipes, and the radiant pipes. The big difference between all three of them is that they have different methods of exchanging temperature with one another. If you want a lot of temperature exchange to happen, you should be using radiant pipes, and you can kind of mix it with the regular liquid pipes too, because they will exchange heat just a little bit. If you absolutely do not want interaction to happen, or rather temperature exchange to happen, you want to use the insulated pipes. In this base, which was from my base game walkthrough, I'll show you a few examples of all three of those in action so you can see why I would use them. One good place is this. This was the overlay that I was showing earlier, which is just a flow for liquid cooling. So what's going on in here is this is a very cold pool of water. It's sitting around 12, 15-ish Celsius in some places. Pretty cool, at least enough to keep a bunch of areas cool. And the different pipes that I'm using in here is I'm using radiant pipe inside this line, only because this fluid is going to be going up and interacting with something that's very hot. So while it's in the cold pool, I want the liquid that's in here to cool down before it gets back in the tank and sent back out. So in this particular line, it's being sent in at about 19C and sent back out at about 16C. So just that interaction with the radiant pipe is helping a lot. Also, because I want to cool specific places, I'm going to switch to insulated pipe, which is going to keep it insulated up until I get up to the place where I want it to exchange temperature. And this is going to be a mixture of radiant pipe and regular pipe. This is just to keep my oxygen setup cool, so that this area doesn't cause a lot of heat spill back into my base, because this area can get kind of hot. You could also totally seal this off, but I will usually like to put doors and stuff like that if I can get access back to things, just in case something breaks. I can get back in there and repair it without having to crack it open and cause a bunch of heat problems. So I prefer to just cool it, but yeah, there's an example of all three of those working together in order to provide cooling, and all three different pipe types kind of going in there. For regular pipes, that's probably what you're going to be using the most often, so something like where I'm feeding my bristle blossoms, just regular pipes. Yeah, nothing wild with that, so we'll jump into the next one. Alright, let's take a look at a really simple piping solution. So, you take a look at this setup. This is just a bathroom that's connected to a water sieve and a reservoir. These reservoirs can be very useful for both gas and liquid for a bunch of different reasons. One of which is that it's basically a space that I can dump a whole bunch of stuff, and it has the ability for me to use inputs and outputs without spending any kind of power on it. So if I can, I'd rather get away with using a liquid reservoir instead of a pit of water for a lot of those reasons. But the basic piping setup between this is just making sure that green always goes into white, rather than green going into green or something like that. So this is a very simple loop. When my duplicates use the shower or the bathroom or something, it comes out of the output pipes, which are going to be green, up the line and to my water sieve. My water sieve will clean it. it'll go out the green into the white of the tank, and then the white, or rather the green of the tank, will go back out into the white of the bathroom. So there's a loop that's going on here that is basically just self-sustaining. Eventually this will fill up too much, by the way, but this is a really simple example of piping. So you always want to make sure that the green goes into the white, green into white, green into white. So very simple loop that we have for water here. All right, let's talk about pipe splitting a little bit. The idea with all these pipes is they can hold a certain capacity at their max. When you have a pipe making a decision, like right here, it's going in two different directions. It's either going to go up to one of my sources or down to another place that it needs to go. So in this case, let's follow it down. It's going to go all the way down to the bottom of the map and eventually hook into all of my suits here. You'll notice that the piping setup that I have here is I'm splitting it off each time it needs to go into another suit. And a lot of what I really want to talk about is what happens when you do those splits. So, if we follow the pipe, we'll just kind of go up here in an empty space. If you follow the pipe and you ever have a decision point for the pipe that's connected to something else, let me turn on my sandbox tools here really quickly. Options, game, enable, yes, done, resume. All right. So what you're going to want to do is every single time that there's a split decision that's supposed to come up here, the pipes are going to try to fill both of these equally. So half will go here, half will go here. If it's ever backed up, then it will go 100% in the direction that is available. And every time you split, it's going to make an equal decision on every decision point to go in that direction. So it'll kind of split it here, 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 and just kind of rotate around to continue to split it over and over. You will want to be aware that if you continue to do this, and you have a whole bunch of splits, eventually pipes down the line are going to be very deprived. So this can be a situation that can be a little bit annoying to figure out. But in this case, what will happen is we'll get a 50-50 split here. So whatever's down on this line is going to get half of it, and the rest of the half is going to go to all of these sources. So you might want to pay attention to your pipe splitting and make sure that you're splitting equally depending on where you want things to go. Let me hook this up really quickly to something so we can kind of see the flow example. Okay, here we go. Just got all these lines heading to different reservoirs for gas. So we'll see the rate at which each of them fills up based upon this pipe splitting pattern. Just going to hook it up here, and yeah, let's watch it go. So yeah, every other one is going to be distributed at each decision point, which means that stuff that's way down the chain is going to get barely anything compared to stuff that's earlier on the chain. This doesn't tend to matter too much if you keep things over, like, pretty pressurized, but it can result in problems if you start not getting enough flow to a certain place. Might be something that you need to pay attention to. Okay, another topic I want to talk about are fancy ways that you can hook up pipes, kind of making use of the input and output behaviors in ways that's going to benefit you. So what we learned just a little bit ago is that the inputs and things is white and the output is green. So you can kind of also think of this as when stuff's on the line, the white stuff is going to take it and the green stuff is going to deliver it to the line. So now that we have thought about it that way, some other things you can do with this is, let's say we have a pipe of water running right here, which we have, but let's say that it's more important to go to one place than the other. This is going to be like my water collection area, but let's say there's something that's more important than that for some reason. I don't know. Let's say our bathrooms are way more important than that or something. If I wanted to make sure that the bathrooms were filled before anything else, what I could do is just take a bridge, put it right on the line so that the white is going to steal everything from that line and take it on its own until it's happy. So let's just run this out to, let's say, another liquid reservoir. Like, oh, I don't have a floor. You need a floor to work? What is this? There we go. So if you do something like this, the water is going to be stolen from this line entirely because this has to be totally satisfied before it will be allowed to pass. So hooked up like that, you can do something like this to assure that your water goes to a place that's higher priority than the other. So that can be a good option. Another thing you can do, and the way that I've got all my water tanks hooked up, is notice how I'm having to go through a bunch of tanks in a row, and each one of these tanks will need to be filled before it allows it to pass on to the next one. This kind of allows all these tanks to be combined into one thing that I can use to get a quick glance at like how much water I have. So if these 4 are full and these 6 aren't, I'll be like, oh, okay, I know I'm not as full on water as I could be. But the other thing you can do, and this only really works that way, if I do the same thing with the outputs like that. The way that the outputs work is if there is water, let me get rid of this bridge by the way. If there is water in a output that is further down the line than another output, this output would be blocked, or sorry, this output would be blocked until this one is able to empty all the way. So once we get a second one filled up here, or actually a good example that I'll just kind of paint some water in here really quickly. The reason that all the water that's going out on this line is only coming from this tank, and why this pump isn't working, is because it is flowing over the top of this output, and this output can no longer work because the outputs that are behind it kind of block it from running. What this setup is doing is it's letting me get the pumping of water out for free. I'm not having to spend any power by running my pump. Instead, my reservoir can just have it coming out here, and I just overlap the water, or the liquid pump here. So if I wanted to demonstrate this, let's say that the tank has run out of water. As soon as it runs out of water, the pump will start to turn on because nothing else is providing water to it anymore. So you can kind of use the inputs and outputs on pretty much anything to set up little flow mechanics that are going to help you out in a bunch of different ways. So white can kind of steal from a line. Greens, if they overlap each other, can make it come from one source over another without paying any expense for power in doing so. You'll also want to make sure that if you do this in other places, like let's say I do this here, for example, the flow that's coming off of this pipe is not going to go into the other one. I know you wouldn't typically do this, but it's not going to go in there, and I'm confident that it's not going to go in there because this output is blocked. There's a bunch of instances where you might want to do this, and there's one with a aqua tuner setup that I wasn't planning on showing, but I guess I'll just show now because it's kind of handy. Alright, here's that example I was talking about. This is way too complicated and we haven't covered all this stuff yet, but the one place that I wanted to focus on is right here. So what's going to happen is this is going to be a big geothermal power setup, and these steam turbines are going to generate a lot of heat, and in order to keep this area cooled down, I have a loop of cool, polluted water that's flowing through all of it. When the water gets too hot, it's going to be taken down on this line because this white is stealing from this line whenever it's enabled. It's going to run into my aqua tuners, here you go. And then when it comes back up, because I have it hooked back up this way, this exit is going to be blocked from this bridge, allowing the flow from my aqua tuners to go right back in and be reevaluated to see if it's too hot. So there you go. Once the flow from the aqua tuner starts, this all gets backed up. So some piping creativity can definitely help in making sure that you are getting the right flow to the right place without causing any problems. But again, be very careful that you hook these up correctly. I'll show an example of how these could be hooked up wrong and what you should do to fix it. So we'll jump to that in just a bit after we talk about shutoffs, which is something that we have here that we haven't discussed yet. Alright, here's a basic ventilation system. The way this is going to work is that when there is gases in here that I don't want anymore, like my carbon dioxide or my chlorine, it'll get pumped out by this gas pump. But there's a bunch of different ways that we could potentially filter this to make sure that I get rid of carbon dioxide. But if I accidentally suck up some oxygen or something like that, I don't want to like blow it into space, which is what I'm doing with my carbon dioxide and chlorine right now. So let's force this to work so that we can see a gas shutoff, which is a really handy way to filter stuff. It's a lot more cheap than a typical gas filter. So what you might get, or what you might think, is if you need to filter this out, you might want to be tempted to use one of these filters. Something like that, where you can say, okay, the carbon dioxide or whatever else I want to go here, everything else is just going to go back on the normal line. The problem with this, and I've talked about this a lot, is that the gas filter uses 120 watts, whereas the shutoff only uses like 10. So if you know how to run your pipes correctly, you can basically get the same level of filtering with like less than 1/10 of the power. So I'd really rather not do that if I don't have to. And instead, I'm going to use a shutoff. So this is a gas shutoff. There's the equivalent for a liquid shutoff too. Well, there it is. The idea with this is that when you have a reason to turn this on, it will turn on and it will basically steal stuff from this pipe. So the flow that I have here, let's pretend I'm just going to let this run so that my duplicates come and get rid of this. But what's going to happen is when the gas pump turns on, it's going to flow up here. And then anything on this line, if this gas shutoff is enabled, it will steal it from that line. It will send it up somewhere. What I'm doing when I want to steal stuff from this line with my gas shutoff is on the tile before it, I'm using an element sensor to tell me what element is in the pipe. So in this case, if there is chlorine in the pipe, it's going to allow the shutoff to turn on, and it will flow up into these tanks where I'm keeping all my chlorine. The chlorine can be really handy to keep if I want to keep my food clean, or if I'm running a Dreco ranch or something like that. But yeah, that's a really handy way to filter it. And then if it's anything that's not chlorine, it will be allowed to pass through the pipes. There are a couple caveats to this though. One of which is you need to make sure there is always somewhere for gases to go, especially on the main line. So one of the reasons that this works is because when I vent into space, I know that this is never going to get blocked unless I do something like I shouldn't. So unless I put like some drywall here or something like that to make the gas not escape into space, then I will know that this is never going to get blocked. So as long as this is never blocked, my filtration should work. The only other caveat to know is that if the power is out for some reason on this line, this will not enable and disable correctly. So you do need to make sure those things are stable, but if you can keep those things stable, this is a much cheaper way to get some filtration. Let me paint in some chlorine here really quickly so that we can see this at work. There we go. Kind of stick a whole bunch of it around this pipe, around this pump. This setup is going to basically wait until we're sure that it's worthy to pump out because it's been sitting in something other than oxygen for long enough. So when it starts to pump it out, which it should here in a second, there we go. When it starts to pump it out, you can see we're getting all kinds of stuff. We're getting carbon dioxide, we're getting oxygen, we're getting chlorine, and when it comes up to this evaluation point for the chlorine, it should enable this to steal the chlorine off to the other line. There you go. All the rest of the stuff, I can just let it pass and send it out here. I know I'm sending oxygen out right now. This is not a typical situation that I'd be in because I just painted it in there. So there's like this weird soup of gases there right now. If you really wanted to make sure you weren't sending any oxygen out, you could do the exact same thing as this, but just set the filter to oxygen so that you could grab it. So yeah, you can just kind of treat any of these shutoffs to be like conditions for when I want to steal something from that line. In the previous example, we were using temperature to know when to steal it, but in this case, it's going to be the type of element. I only want chlorine to go in here, so that's what I'm going to steal it from the line. Alright, here's another example that we can easily replicate of showing a problem with how your pipes flow. So one thing to make sure of is that you know which direction that things are going to be flowing. For this pipe in particular, I know it's always going to be flowing upward, because the only things that are going to be requesting things from this line are going to be this, and eventually the thing all the way out into space up here, that. So I know that there's only going to be requesters on that line, and they are in order, but sometimes that can get confusing. So what might happen is, let's say I have a bunch of natural gas generators and some pumps down here that can pump out some excess carbon dioxide, because if my petroleum generators turn on, lots of carbon dioxide is going to get in here and I might want to get rid of it. So let's say all that is coming out and I just kind of hook up my pipes like that. And then I'm like, yep, whenever this is going to come out, I just want to blow it straight out into space. So that's what I want to do. Yeah. But here's the problem. Now the problem is, this is saying, hey, all of my green things, I want to go down on this line and I want to go towards all the white things. Well, guess what? There's a white thing here too that it might want to go to. It'll go out to here if it can, but now it's confused. It's like, do I go here and try to fight my way over there? Or do I go here because we know because of the splitting, it's going to have to make a decision here that's going to keep it roughly equal. So right now, our pipes are all blocked because it doesn't know how to handle this. So what you're going to want to make sure of is one of two things. Either that you always hook up your pipes at a spot that makes sense for them, like this. So if I know that the flow is always going to be upward, I want to make sure to hook it in at the place where it's still going to be traveling upward rather than getting it confused. Let me hook this back up again and ruin it. There we go. So if I hook it back up and ruin it, Another way I could deal with this is I could assure that I know what direction that this pipe is trying to flow, because right now I'm getting things telling it two different answers. I'm getting one thing telling it to go this way, and I'm getting one thing to tell it to go that way. So the packets in there don't really know which way to go, and they're going to get stuck. So what I can do instead is I can just disconnect this, and we can... I'll just disconnect a couple of these, actually, just to get it out of the way here. Deconstruct that. What I can do is I can just set up a bridge to force a direction. So I want to force this to go right. So that will make it so that this is no longer confusing. And then when I hook this back up, all that's going to happen is this. It'll just kind of be forced down the line in this direction. And now on this side, I only have green, 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 green. There's a green here, and then finally a white out in space. So that will force it to go the direction that I want it to. And this can be a common setup for a lot of different things. I'll see a lot of people with, like, their food, for example. They will link all their pipes through their food like this, and then they'll have a second source that's trying to provide to this too. But these two things are going to be like depriving each other of it, because the flow doesn't know which direction to go if it's hooked up that way. So yeah, make sure that you are retaining one directional flow on every single piece of pipe. Otherwise, you're going to get backups and it's just not going to work sometimes. All right, let's talk a little bit about reservoir automation. So if you click on one of these reservoirs, same thing for liquid or gas, there's going to be these activation parameters of basically what range you want to keep the fluid or gas or whatever it is within. And when it's not within those, it will, or rather when it is within those, it'll send a red signal saying, oh, I'm happy, I don't need more, I'm cool with this. Once it gets too low, it'll turn these things back on. And this is a handy way for me to assure that I have only oxygen on this line. I'm pumping it in from my base. I'm making sure to filter it, by the way. Here's a gas shutoff that's going to be doing the filtering for me, like we were just looking at. But as soon as this tank gets too low, let me change this so that it turns on for us. It'll set the automation wire to green, which will enable my pumps to start pumping out. And it will start pumping out gas as much as possible, getting rid of anything that is not oxygen, because I only have this thing activated to steal from this pipe if the element before is not oxygen. It's going to continue to fill up this until it reaches its max capacity. So let's just set it to something so that it turns off. Let's say if it's between 51 and 24%, then it's going to be happy and it's not going to ask for more. So it should get there in just a second, but yeah. This is something that you can use in a lot of different situations to help you understand either like when you might be low on something, or if you just don't want to run this all the time. Like, I don't want to keep these things running if there's no reason to run them. If I have a good backup of oxygen, it's now telling me that it's full. Then it's going to be like, okay, cool, I don't need this to pump anymore. So yeah, automation hooked up to these reservoirs and up to your tools that you're going to use for piping can be very handy. Alright, let's just take a quick surf around the base so that you can see a bunch of different examples in action. Because looking at a base like this is like, whoa, this is really complicated. But it's really not that bad once you kind of take a look at it. So let's take a look at a few examples that kind of take all this stuff into consideration. Here's an example. This is a volcano setup. Basically what's going to happen is this is going to erupt with really hot metal. And that is going to need to be cooled down. And finally, it's going to need to be cooled down to a degree that it's fine going in my base. I don't want metal that's going to be at 2,226 degrees to be going into my base. And one thing I can use to cool that down is just a big pool of water that I can keep cool. The way that I can keep it cool is by having a closed loop of polluted water going from this reservoir, going through a liquid shutoff, that is. And the liquid shutoff only allows stuff to pass if this water in here is too hot. So it'll go down to the aqua tuner, it'll come right back up and back into the tank. So a nice closed circuit here. The shutoff is really just to make sure that the polluted water that's in this pipe is not too cold, because if it's too cold, it'll get broken when the aqua tuner cools it down to a point that it will freeze. And I really don't want that to happen. So yeah, simple little piping thing there. Here's the pipes that we were just looking at for the air, or rather for ventilation. I think we've seen most of this already, so this is not that overly complicated. Just have it kind of stemming down into suits here. There's some that's going into areas to overpressurize it so that I can get better cooling. Yeah, gas pipes are looking pretty simple by this point. Let's take a look at some other areas that we have for cooling. Here's another closed loop for cooling for like an ice-based cooling, which I have over here. So basically cold water, and instead of an aqua tuner, I'm just running ice into these bins every once in a while, which, there you go, a bunch of it just melted. But when ice melts, it turns into really cold water, and the stuff that's inside this tank is just going to be interacting with that via the pipes that are going to be in here, the radiant pipes. Then any excess, because I have my liquid pump sitting up here at the top, is just going to be pumped out. It's going to follow down this line, and this is like my drainage line that I'm going to consider now. This could be a mixture of clean and dirty water, so I know that my drainage line is going to be connected to a whole bunch of stuff. Here's another place where ice is melting and turning into cold water. It's also getting mixed in with my sink water and that kind of stuff. But my flow is all one directional. I'm making sure that all of my connection points basically flow from green to white. And there's a whole bunch of mixed water that's coming through here and eventually going through my water sieves. If it's clean water, it'll pass. If it's polluted water, it'll get cleaned and turned into clean water. And then we're back to the setup that we had before. Notice that this is much more full at this save. So I have a big pool of water here. All my tanks are full. So because all my tanks are full, at the very end of this, I have it coming out into a vent that is allowing it to just drop into this area and to just kind of pool up because I can't hold it all in my reservoirs. You could make like infinity billion-D reservoirs, but the problem with that is it's a lot of metal. So eventually I'm going to get to a point where I probably just want it to kind of sit out here and be excess for me. If it really gets too bad and I can't manage it, I can also just vent it into space, which is not the greatest thing for clean water, but it's better than having a huge backup in your pipes. One other thing that's kind of interesting here, another example of the automation, is that whenever this is saying, hey, I don't have enough water, which means that it's too low, then it's going to turn on a notifier for me, which is going to let me know that, hey, I have too low of water, which means my water system is about half empty. So lots of different things you can do with piping and with your setups and stuff like that. I didn't want to go into like horrible levels of detail because the last tutorial that I put together on piping was way too long. So hopefully this one is a little bit more concise. If you have any questions or any suggestions for future videos, remember this one was just because of a comment that was left on my video. I'm going to do this every once in a while where I kind of just throw something together from a comment and answer those in video form because they can be very handy for other people. But yeah, let me know if you have any other things that you think might be good for a format like this. I'll see you back here really soon. Only a couple videos away from the spaced out walkthrough, but we're going to get there. Alright, I'll see you soon.